Today, I'm going to walk you through how to feed sourdough starter in order to make a sourdough loaf. And I'm also going to talk you through how to start your own starter. But before we get started, make sure to like this video for more homesteading content and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any new videos, including how to make a beautiful sourdough loaf. So the first thing you should know is when I first started out making sourdough, I wanted to make my own starter. It seemed pretty simple, and it's just a matter of combining 50% flour with 50% water, and then letting it sit on your counter and ferment. You'll need to refeed it, and that's kind of an experimental process. I want to say that it took me maybe 6 to 8 weeks to finally get a fermented sourdough starter just from those two ingredients. But it's nice to know that you don't have to order anything online. You can just make it yourself with just flour and water. Now, one of the biggest mistakes I made in the beginning of sourdough making was that I always made so much starter. And there are a lot of videos out there on social media that will show you people using like quart or even larger, like half-gallon sized jars and like having this huge starter overflow. But the truth is, when I am making just one sourdough loaf, I'm only using pint jars. Let's review some of these materials that I've got and what you would need for starting your sourdough in the first place and then feeding it. So I use pint-sized jars to feed my starter, and you can use this as kind of like your rotating cup. So I will switch this out with other cups when I make a new one, like here. And then I always have a backup. So this is what you would call the inactive starter. It's alive, I keep it in my fridge, and anytime I have extra discard, I throw it in here. I can use this discard for all kinds of things. I use it with eggs to make a breading for meats. I'll put it in baking dishes. There's all kinds of recipes online that can allow for the use of sourdough discard. Actually, one of my favorite things I've ever made is sourdough discard crackers. They're delicious and they kind of taste kind of cheesy. But other than that, I'm just using a scale and lukewarm water. This is actually a really convenient little pourer. It's a butter warmer. Ever since we got rid of our microwave, we needed a way to like warm up liquids and butter and things like that on the stovetop. So I'll link this below as well as the scale. And then I use King Arthur organic bread flour. You want to be consistent with the bread flour that you use with your starter and your bread. You can transition them over time, but at some point you need to like pick your flour and stick with it. So when I started, I had so much discard, but I've gotten to the point where I've been able to be more conservative with how much sourdough I'm actually feeding, and uh, and then I end up using a bunch of the discard. So today what I'm going to do is now feed my starter because the next thing I want to do is make a loaf tonight. And if you notice, I have a little rubber band on here because when I fill up my next jar, I'm going to take the rubber band off and put it at the level where my flour mixture is in here. And you want your starter to double in size in order to make a fresh sourdough loaf. So this is my active starter. I'm going to turn my scale on, set it to grams. And when you feed your starter, you're feeding it at a 1-to-1 ratio with everything, starter, flour, and water. So let's see how much I have here. I'm going to do 30 5 grams of starter. And I just realized that I mixed up my ratio here. It's not 1-to-1. It's 1 part starter, 2 parts flour, and 2 parts flour in water. So 1, 2, 2. And I'm going to stop it at 35. I'm not going to just feed this whole thing because if I did, that would give me way more active starter than I need for my sourdough loaf. And that means the rest of this is going to go in there. But before I continue, I've got 35 grams of starter in this jar. I'm going to tare it. Since it's 1, 2, 2, this is going to be 70 grams of starter, of water. And I like this little pourer because it really helps make it very accurate. You really don't have to be on the nose with sourdough. It's very flexible. So if you're within like 1 or 2 grams, it's no big deal. At this stage, I like to mix it up because similar with like baking, I feel like whenever you mix things before adding in the flour, everything is just more consistent and evenly mixed. Now I'm going to tare it again and put 70 grams of flour in here. Okay. Now this will get to be a nice thick consistency. And in terms of timing for when you do this, I will try to feed my starter first thing in the morning. And then by the evening, I am ready to make my loaf, or at least the dough for the loaf, which will then rest and rise overnight. I read when I first started making sourdough, it's a great idea to taste your starter and your dough at every level or every step to really get to know the flavors. So now this is my new starter that has been fed with the band right there. And so I can expect that tonight it's going to double, if not increase more than double, and it'll be ready to make a sourdough loaf tonight. And then in the meantime, I'm just going to add the rest of this discard in here to use at another time. So you can see how people could really make way more than they need to. Maybe they're just making like multiple loaves and that's not very obvious, but I'm making 1 large loaf. And so this is going to last almost indefinitely in the fridge. It can develop this brown liquid at the very top, and that is called hooch. And that is just like old fermented liquid rising to the top. You can mix it back in. But this is where people talk about they have starter that's like 100+ years old. Starter lasts forever. You can keep it in the fridge for almost indefinitely. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll dehydrate it and then turn it into a powder, which then I could later activate it with water if I wanted to. So my starter is fed. I've got all this discard, and later I'm going to make a loaf and I'll post a video on how to do exactly that. Let me know if you have any questions of just this first part of the process in the comments below, and make sure to like and subscribe this video and check out my other videos for healthy homesteading.